श्री स्वामीनारायण भगवान निजे अक्षर पुरुषोत्तम महाराज निजे प्रमुख स्वामी महाराज निजे महंत स्वामी महाराज निजे प्रमुख स्वामी महाराज शताब्दी महोत्सव जय. Today we are carrying on with our study of the Jivan Charitra, and we're looking at section E, pages 204 to 253. In the last session, it was the year 1959, and Yogiji Maharaj had embarked on an international tour to East Africa. This was the first time that Pramukh Swami Maharaj was going to join on the tour. Nishkudanand Swami has written in the Purushottam Prakash, Sant desh pardesh fare chere, sauna jivna ag hare chere. Ena darshan sparsh je karshe re, te to bhavajad par utarshe re. Nishkudanand Swami, this has been written in the Purushottam Prakash in chapter number 41. And in this chapter, Nishkudanand Swami is explaining the greatness and the mahima of a sant. Ke sant desh pardesh fare chere, the sant will travel from place to place, sau jivna ag hare chere, to relieve the sins of all the souls that he comes across. Ena darshan sparsh je karshe re, te to bhavajad par utarshe re. This is the greatness of such a sant, that whosoever has his darshan or even has a chance to touch that sant will be redeemed from the cycle of birth and death, from the ocean of life. Gunadhan Swami has also said, कि आवा संतना दर्शन करसे तो मनना पाप भरी जसे, आँखना पाप भरी जसे. आवा संतने मनमा संभारसे तो मनना पाप भरी जसे. This is the greatness and the mahima of the Satpurush. And when such a Satpurush as Puja Yogi Bapa, Puja Pramukh Swami Maharaj, Puja Mahant Swami Maharaj, when they embark on such an international tour, it is a huge privilege, one, to be on that tour, but also to have been witness to such a sant and to such a group of santos as well. Yogiji Maharaj, as we've seen in the previous chapters, as Yogiji Maharaj was always found a way to try and highlight Pramukh Swami Maharaj in front of all the Hari Bhaktas as well. And similarly, when he was leaving for the tour in 1959, he requested Puja Pramukh Swami Maharaj to also join him on the tour. At that time, Puja Pramukh Swami Maharaj very humbly folded his hands and said, Swami, you can carry on. Obviously, there's a lot of other work, because if all of them go abroad, then the work in India would slow down. Nevertheless, Yogi Bapa had another vision, and Yogi Bapa wanted to make sure that he was able to also introduce everybody to Pramukh Swami Maharaj, to introduce all the Hari Bhaktas to Pramukh Swami Maharaj, and introduce Pramukh Swami Maharaj to all the Hari Bhaktas, just to make sure that they all know that who the president of the Sanstha is at that time. Now it's noteworthy that Yogi Bapa was 68 years old at that time. Pramukh Swami Maharaj was merely 38 years old. And in the group, there were 4 santos and 1 parshad. Yogiji Maharaj, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, Sant Vallabh Swami, Bal Mukund Swami, and Vinu Bhagat was joined them as the parshad as well. Vinu Bhagat, Puja Mahant Swami Maharaj, was only 26 years old at that time. Yogiji Maharaj had even requested Arun Bhai Dave from Mumbai to join them as well. Arun Bhai was, who we all know today as Puja Ishwar Charan Swami. He was only 21 years old at that time. And we can see in the photograph, we can see images of all the santos in that image as well. Now, a very interesting incident regarding Bal Mukund Swami had happened many years prior to this. Yogiji Maharaj this was Yogi Bapa's second tour. But prior to this, in 1955, when Yogiji Maharaj was going to travel to East Africa, at that time, Yogiji Maharaj wanted to take Puja Bal Mukund Swami with him as well. We noticed that Bal Mukund Swami joined him in this tour, but in 1955, Yogi Bapa wanted to take Bal Mukund Swami with him as well. However, what had happened was, because it was a huge honor, because this was the first international tour in BAPS that the santos were going to travel abroad. And so, back in the day, from anybody who was traveling abroad from India, it was a big thing. And so the santos were also going to join. Yogi Bapa had selected all the sadhus. Bal Mukund Swami was also selected as part of this group. And in order to travel, normally they would do is they would make a final round to all the mandirs. And while they were traveling, they came to Atladra. And Puja Akshar Swami was there as well. And Akshar Swami's health wasn't too well at that time. And so Yogi Bapa went to meet him. And he asked him about his well-being. And at that time, Puja Akshar Swami said, "Look, Swami, I know you're going abroad, but who's going to look after me while I'm over here? Because due to my illness. And it would be nice if someone like Balmukund Swami was in Seva as well." Not that he was hinting about Balmukund Swami, but just someone like Balmukund Swami. All Yogi Bapa did was he looked at Balmukund Swami. And Balmukund Swami understood Yogi Bapa's ruchi, his anuvrutti. And immediately he picked up on Yogi Bapa's wish. And he told Yogi Bapa, "Swami, if you wish, I don't mind. I'll stay back. And I'll stay back from instead of going on the tour, I'll stay back and do Puja Akshar Swami's Seva." Now this is a huge deal because, again, as I mentioned, it was the first time the tour was going. All the names had been announced. And to go and join Yogi Bapa as well is a huge honor and a privilege. Yet, just by understanding Yogi Bapa's ruchi, his anuvrutti, Balmukund Swami stayed back and he didn't embark on that tour. But Yogi Bapa was so happy on Balmukund Swami. Pramukh Swami Maharaj would often, whenever he would talk about Balmukund Swami, he would remember this incident. And he would say that it was this one incident that was a game changer for Balmukund Swami. Because એમાં sthiti thei gai, Pramukh Swami Maharaj said, કે Yogi Bapa ને એટલો બધો રાજીપો મળી ગયો. Because of that, all the blessings were showered on him. Eventually, Yogi Baba blessed him, and we all know that Balmukund Swami was a Sadguru Sant of an Ekantik Sthiti who passed away 5-6 years ago. So he was also joining on this tour as well at that time. So sometimes just one small agna of the Satpurush can outweigh years of mandhari sadhana. Somebody could have done lots of sadhana on their own accord, but just one small agna of Yogi Bapa or a Satpurush like this could change the game. In the previous session, we were discussing how Pramukh Swami Maharaj had joined Yogi Ji Maharaj on the international tour. So as we move on, we will see on the slides, you can see how initially they landed in Nairobi, and from Nairobi they drove to Tororo. But en route, they stopped over in Naivasha, Nakuru, Eldoret. Many people who lived in Africa know this as the Rift Valley. And satsang wasn't as big as it is today. Nevertheless, even though there were just a few Hari Bhaktos, Pramukh Swami Maharaj Yogi Baba made sure that they would stop over in all these other places as well. From Tororo, they went to Bugiri, Jinja, and then eventually to Kampala. The whole purpose of this trip, one of the main purposes of this trip, was the pratishtha of these mandirs that were in Jinja, Kampala, and Tororo. But as a preliminary tour, Puja Yogi Bapa went to some of these villages as well, these towns as well. They celebrated Diwali in Kampala. This was for the first time in 30 years that Yogi Bapa was away from Gondal and he celebrated Diwalis. Again, another huge honor to be in the presence of the Satpurush and to celebrate Diwali. Many of us have been very blessed that whenever Swami Shri had been in the UK, we've celebrated the Diwali Utsav, the Ankot and the Diwali and Labh Pancham with Puja Pramukh Swami Maharaj over here in London. Not to mention that in the year 2017, Puja Mahan Sai Maharaj also blessed us over here in London with his presence and celebrated the Diwali Ankut Utsav over here in London. So we are all aware of how fortunate it is to have been in the presence of Yogi Bapa, Pramukh Sai Maharaj and Puja Mahan Sai Maharaj back then. Remember, Puja Mahan Sai Maharaj was as a Parshad at that time. But this was the first time that an event like this was celebrated abroad as well. There have been events like this. Africa has been very blessed because in 1988, Pramukh Swami Maharaj also celebrated Pramukh Swami Maharaj's birthday celebrations in Nairobi as well. Similarly, there are some festivals that are very, the locations of these festivals are very much fixed, like Diwali Ankot is always in Gondal, or Fuldol Utsav is always in Sarangpur. Nevertheless, Puja Mahan Sai Maharaj broke that tradition in 2018 when he traveled to the Asia Pacific. And they celebrated the Fuldol festival in Sydney. So similarly, we can see that it must have been a huge event to celebrate Diwali in Kampala. After Diwali, they traveled to Masaka and where we know that they stopped over at the line of the equator. So this was Yogi Bapa's Vicharan while he was there in Uganda. Furthermore, we look at the next slide. From Masaka, they then visited Owen Falls, which is near Jinja. And then from there, they went to Lake Victoria in Majanji. And this is on their route to Tororo. From Tororo, they eventually made their way to Mwanza in Tanzania. So we can see that as well in the slide. You could see that they had to go all around Lake Victoria. As we move on, we can see that Yogiji Maharaj then, from there they went, while they were in Tanzania, the Vicharan was very, very hectic. And there was a lot of back and forth, to and fro in the Vicharan over here as well. But from there, they made their way to Dar es Salaam. From Mwanza, they went to Misungwi, Ilula, Runere, Shinyaga, etc. And eventually they ended up in Tabora. From Tabora, Swamiji then went to Dodoma, and eventually they got to Morogoro before getting to Dar es Salaam. So we can see a very hectic Vicharan over here in East Africa. From Nairobi, Swami went all the way, went into Uganda, came back into Tanzania, all the way to Dar es Salaam. And then again, Swami if you look at the next slide, we can see then from there, Swami then goes from Dar es Salaam, when they came to Dar es Salaam, from Dar es Salaam, they went to Zanzibar, they went to Tanga, Moshi, Arusha, and eventually they ended up in Nairobi. And we heard in the last session how Pramukh Swami Maharaj shared his memories of the trip when they went to Moshi, because Pramukh Swami Maharaj said that their accommodation was at a Haribhakta's house, which was facing Mount Kilimanjaro. And Swami said that it was a very nice, a very scenic place where Swami would do his puja. And he would do his puja facing the Mount Kilimanjaro. I think just visualizing that image is also brings a lot of tranquility to our minds as well. Eventually, when they get to Nairobi, they celebrated 3 festivals in Nairobi: Uttarayan, Poshi Punam, and Vasant Panchami. And Pramukh Swami Maharaj reiterated that in his Ashirad as well, that we're very, very fortunate to have celebrated all 3 events, because Vasant Panchami marks the birthday of Brahmaswarup Shastriji Maharaj. Poshi Punam marks the Diksha Din of Gunatidan Swami. And Uttarayan, as we all know, is the Jodi festivities. So again, they managed to celebrate some 3 magnificent festivals in Nairobi as well. Now, everywhere they went, Yogiji Maharaj would ask Sant Swami and Pramukh Swami Maharaj to deliver discourses wherever they went. And in fact, he would often make the announcement himself. While he was speaking, halfway through his katha, he would stop and then he would say that now the president of our Sanstha, Narayan Swami, will speak. Please listen carefully. And Swami would always end up speaking. Pramukh Swami Maharaj would always end up giving a speech or doing some sort of katha. Nevertheless, he was always ready. But Pramukh Swami Maharaj recounted these memories many years later. And he said that initially, I hardly used to speak. He said that we would do seva, but Yogi Baba would insist that I speak. Remember, Yogi Baba wanted to make sure that everybody knew who the Pramukh of the Sanstha was. He was trying to also establish Pramukh Swami Maharaj as the president of the Sanstha as well. And so Pramukh Swami Maharaj carried on saying that, all I would do is normally I would get involved in seva, but Yogi Baba would insist that I speak. And so then when we went to Africa, this increased. And since then, I was able to speak much more freely. It's noteworthy knowing that Pramukh Swami Maharaj had done many parayans prior to this. And mainly, the way the parayans were recited was, he would recite the shloks in Sanskrit and then read the translations again. So it wasn't much like an actual speech. And so this tour really brought Pramukh Swami Maharaj out and made him able to speak much more freely as well. So Swami says, since then I became a lot more talkative. I think many of us know that Pramukh Swami Maharaj, as we heard prior to this, was very, very quiet. He was very shy, very meek. Nevertheless, in his later years, we've all known how Pramukh Swami Maharaj was the ability to engage with audiences, with anybody he met, and connect straight away. That was the incredible personality that Pramukh Swami Maharaj had. So then after Pramukh Swami Maharaj would have spoken, Yogi Baba would compliment Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And then he would say that Pramukh Swami Maharaj spoke very, very well. This is a new country and we want to leave an impact. We want to leave a mark. And in that way, everybody will remember what Pramukh Swami Maharaj had spoken. And then he would also encourage Vinu Bhagat. Vinu Bhagat was with him as well. Vinu Bhagat meaning Puja Mohan Sai Maharaj. But Vinu Bhagat would speak very, very slow and very softly. And so Yogi Bappa in a very jolly way, as a joke as well, he would tell Vinu Bhagat, you should also speak. And you should speak loudly, not timidly. And he would joke about this with Puja Mohan Sai Maharaj, because obviously his voice was very gentle, very soft. Even today we know that Swami Sri Puja Mohan Sai Maharaj speaks very gently and very softly. During the travels, they would go to so many villages and so many towns, no matter how small they were. Sometimes it was just to visit maybe one or two Hari Bhaktas. And even if it was just one or two families, Yogiji Maharaj and Pramukh Swami Maharaj made sure they made the effort to go and visit that family or that house. But it was these visits that left such a lasting impression in the minds of all the Hari Bhaktas. And even to date, so many still remember. Many of us have experienced this in London as well, or in the UK, that whenever Pramukh Swami Maharaj used to come, he would make a visit, just one small visit, even if it was for 3, 4, 5 minutes, it left a lasting impression. In fact, everybody felt very honored that the Satpurush actually visited and blessed our houses. So this was the Vicharan, the travels that Swami Shri was in Africa. So we talked about it, is that how Swami Shri was there in Uganda, and while he was in Uganda, Swami Shri's main purpose, obviously, Yogi Bappa was there to do the Pratishta. We know that from Nairobi, they went to Kisumu. From Kisumu, they went to Kampala. They did the Pratishta over there. Then from there, they went to Jinja. And then they did the Pratishta there. From Jinja, they went to Tororo. So this is a very nice incident that we know, that we discussed in the last session. Let's move on to E44. Now, during their stay in Jinja, Puja Sant Vallabh Swami was experiencing difficulties in adjusting to the climate. And as a result, he was struggling to breathe. And so they decided eventually, he was struggling to sleep. It was just very difficult for him. So eventually it was decided to send Puja Sant Swami to Mabale. While Sant Swami went to Mabale, he was accompanied with Puja Bal Mukund Swami. Now we noticed that there were only 4 Santos and 1 Parshad. So if the 2 of them have now left to Mabale, that leaves Yogi Bappa, Pramukh Swami and Mahan Sai Maharaj. Only 3 of them had to travel together with some Hari Bhaktas and Yuvaks. Puja Sant Swami would share the load with Pramukh Swami Maharaj in doing the Katha. But now that Sant Swami has left, all that responsibility fell on to Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Puja Bal Mukund Swami, he was mainly involved in serving Yogi Bappa. And one of his sevas was to make sure that he looked after and served Hari Krishna Maharaj. While they were serving Hari Krishna Maharaj, he was also involved in carrying out the seva related to Yogi Bappa's puja. So just laying out the puja and all that. Now, when 2 members of the team had departed, that meant all the load or all the extra seva came onto Pramukh Swami Maharaj's, onto his responsibility fell upon him. Now, due to the absence of Bal Mukund Swami, Pramukh Swami Maharaj now had to take on the extra seva of serving Hari Krishna Maharaj, as well as Yogi Bappa's daily puja. Now this included waking Hari Krishna Maharaj up, bathing him, offering thar, putting on the new clothes, putting Hari Krishna Maharaj to sleep. Pramukh Swami Maharaj engaged in all these sevas with so much care and loving devotion. And everybody witnessed how Pramukh Swami Maharaj was able to engage in such deep bhakti even when he was so engaged in all the administrative presidential duties. Now, if you think about it, everything else Swami had to do. All the administration or all the organization of the tour, he was also involved in that. Pramukh Swami Maharaj had done this seva initially in Gondal, when he had just initially taken Diksha. We heard that in the previous sessions, how he used to serve Thakurji along with the Pujari Sant as well. I remember when Pramukh Swami Maharaj was here in 1994, in Leicester, and while he was doing his puja, at that time the Sevak Sant was offering the thar to Hari Krishna Maharaj. And at that time, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, the Sevak started feeling a lot of pressure on the dish that he was holding. He was trying to offer the thar to Thakurji, but Pramukh Swami Maharaj was putting a little bit of pressure on the Sevak's hand. So the Sevak was wondering, why is Pramukh Swami Maharaj pushing my hand lower? And immediately at that time, Pramukh Swami Maharaj then explained to the Sevak that if you lower your hand, it's easier for Thakurji to take some food, because what was originally happening was the Sevak had lifted the dish and was keeping it right next to Thakurji's mouth. So it's very difficult to eat. So Pramukh Swami Maharaj said, look, how is it easy for Thakurji to eat if you put the dish so high up? And so we can see just little things about how Pramukh Swami Maharaj engaged in bhakti. We could see, and this is something that Swami had done throughout his life. Now, Pramukh Swami Maharaj also looked after the arrangements of Yogi Bapa's daily puja. Now, this included setting up his puja, getting the flowers ready, ensuring that all the sanctified water was ready for Thakurji, as well as winding up the puja, setting up the flowers. Now, many of us have seen how, even today, with Puja Mahan Sai Maharaj, there is a sevak who's always helping with the daily puja. None of this was new to Pramukh Swami Maharaj, because he had also done this in the time of Shastriji Maharaj. And it was very interesting to see how he was serving Yogi Bapa in the same manner in which he had served Shastriji Maharaj. We always sing, Shobho sadhu gune sada saralane, jakte anasakta cho, Shastri ji Guru Yogi ji ubhayani, krupatanu patra cho. Just the way that he had received the blessings of Shastriji Maharaj. Similarly, in the way he did his seva, he also received blessings from Yogi Bapa as well. So both the gurus were pleased with him in this way. And he did all this as well as performing the discourses, as we mentioned earlier on. He did the katha. He was there with the padramanis. He was there with making all the arrangements for Yogi Bapa's daily schedule, the meetings, as well as the katha. Despite this, he engaged in this seva with such enthusiasm and such bhakti. Puja Mahan Sai Maharaj goes on to say another thing as well, that how Mahan Sai Maharaj's role, Vinu Bhagat's role, was to help Yogi Bapa and lay out the bedding and all those things as well. But Vinu Bhagat was alone. So again, Pramukh Swami Maharaj would also join Mahan Sai Maharaj, and both of them would get together and lay out Puja Yogi Bapa's bedding as well. Let's move on to E45. As we mentioned earlier on, Puja Ishwar Charan Swami, Arun Bhai, was also traveling on this tour as well. He was only 21 years old, but one of his main roles that Yogi Bapa took him along with was as a chef. So he was also doing all the cooking for all the santos. That was one of his roles, that was one of his seva. So at this time, he got a chance to see Pramukh Swami Maharaj from up very close. And he shared an experience about Pramukh Swami Maharaj that left him with a lot of respect for Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And he goes on to write that a great impression from that time still remains with me. It is as if I can see it before my eyes even now. At that time, I was cooking for all the sadhus. The whole Sant Mandal would prefer mild food. Yogiji Maharaj's food would be mild and plain, without any oil or any spices. Sant Swami, Puja Sant Vallabh Swami, and Bal Mukund Swami had a similar interest as well. They were the same as well. The one sadhu left was Pramukh Swami Maharaj. Actually, he was able to eat spicy food and had no issue with it. But for 8 months, I prepared food as well as I could. I was merely a novice cook and learning on the job. Pramukh Swami Maharaj, however, never once complained or suggested anything about the food. He never told me off if I had made anything incorrectly, nor did he ever tell me to make anything in a particular way. He would eat whatever was in the wooden bowl, remembering Maharaj. That is when I first realized that this individual is above taste. Now, this was the impression that Puja Ishwar Charan Swami had with his travels with Pramukh Swami Maharaj. And this is something I think most of us would be able to relate to. When we enjoy something, if we have to eat something that anybody else has to eat without picking and choosing, it becomes very, very difficult. But Pramukh Swami Maharaj never once did he complain. And this is something that we have all noticed in Pramukh Swami Maharaj's life. Puja Yogavivek Swami often tells us that the last 4 years of Pramukh Swami Maharaj's life, even while he was in Saharanpur and he was suffering from so much pain and illnesses, but not once had he ever complained. A huge learning lesson from the life of the Satpurush. Now, usually when we stay close to any individual for a prolonged period of time, it's so easy to see the flaws of the other individual. And there is a saying that says, familiarity breeds contempt. But this experience was very different when living with Puja Pramukh Swami Maharaj. As we listen to what Puja Ishwar Charan Swami had to say, that the more you got to know Pramukh Swami Maharaj, the more you grew fonder of him. And the more we were left in awe and respect. Normally we all experience that if we stay too close to somebody and spend a lot of time with somebody, their flaws start to come up and we get to see all their flaws. And sometimes we start nitpicking on little things like this. But that wasn't true with Pramukh Swami Maharaj. The more somebody stayed and the more people got acquainted with Pujya Pramukh Swami Maharaj, the more people started to realize his greatness. So after the Pratishtha in Tororo, Swamiji then traveled to Mabale, Bukeria, and a few other towns and villages to meet all the Hari Bhaktas. Again, we mentioned how satisfied and how everybody was so happy with the visits that the Santos made at that time. It wasn't just, they took a lot of personal interest in the lives of all these Hari Bhaktas. Let's move on to E46 now. So from Uganda, they all proceeded to Central Africa. Yogiji Maharaj was welcomed in Nyasa land, which was about 2,000 miles from East Africa. Everybody who was there was elated, very, very happy, as if their relatives had arrived. And that's the joy and experience that everybody experienced while Yogiji Maharaj and Pramukh Swami Maharaj were there as well. Yogiji Maharaj and Pramukh Swami Maharaj, they were to stay in Blantyre. Now during this stay, they visited many other small towns and villages. As we mentioned earlier on, little small towns, small villages, even if it was just one or two Hari Bhaktas, yet Pramukh Swami Maharaj and Yogiji Maharaj made sure that they visited all these houses. Now this year's Full Dole Festival was to be celebrated in Salisbury, which is in Rhodesia. And on this day, Pramukh Swami Maharaj, he spoke about the greatness of Bhagatji Maharaj and shared many inspiring incidences from the life of Bhagatji Maharaj. But he also referenced from the chapters in the Bhakta Chintamani, from the chapters from chapter 64 and 65. So as we all know, it was always a pleasure listening to Pramukh Swami Maharaj sing and narrate from the Bhakta Chintamani. We heard that Shastriji Maharaj always used to listen to Pramukh Swami Maharaj narrate from the Bhakta Chintamani. It must have been a huge honor and a pleasure for all the Hari Bhaktas there to be treated to a pravachan from Pramukh Swami Maharaj, where he also narrated incidences from the Bhakta Chintamani. Yogiji Maharaj and Pramukh Swami Maharaj eventually reached, they got to the border of South Africa. Lots of devotees that were living in South Africa had also come over here to get labh. The river Limpopo, which flows through the border between the two countries. So Pramukh Swami Maharaj then sanctified the river by giving Thakurji a bath in the river as well. Many of us who might have seen the Nilkant Charitra travels, we know that everywhere that Nilkant Varni went, he would bless. He would take a dip in the river and so sanctified all these rivers. Similarly, even while they were traveling over here, Yogiji Maharaj would also encourage Pramukh Swami Maharaj and the other Santos to make sure that they gave Thakurji also a bath in some of the rivers to bless the rivers and sanctify them as well. On the way to Livingston, the sadhus then bathed Thakurji in the river Lukosi. And the great Victoria Falls is also located in Livingston as well. So Hare Krishna Maharaj was also bathed there to sanctify and bless the waters over there. Swamiji also went to Zimba and Kalomo. And on the way to Lusaka, they visited a place called Choma and Monze. Then Yogiji Maharaj and Pramukh Swami Maharaj would also visit places where even, as we mentioned earlier, only one Hari Bhakt resided. Gunadhan Swami has said it in one of his vatos, that More to mumukshu Bhagwan ne shodhata. Aje to Bhagwan mumukshu ne shodhe che. Previously, aspirants would travel in search for Bhagwan, in search of God. But today it is God and the Sant who travels in search of such aspirants. And this was one of the objectives of this tour, to go and reach and connect and meet all these aspirants. This is what Nilkant Varni did. He traveled as well. While he was traveling, he was also visiting and meeting all these aspirants. And this is one of the purposes of this Vicharan. Yogiji Maharaj and Swami Shri would travel miles by car solely to ensure that all the people that came on this path were able to experience a bliss of satsang. Now this trip really reignited the spiritual flame that was latent in so many families. Sometimes it is just one trip like this, one visit from a Satpurush, from the Sant like this, that would reignite the faith that was there with all the Hari Bhaktas as well. Soon, the month-long visit to Central Africa was nearing completion. On the way back to Salisbury, they came to the river Zambezi. Yogiji Maharaj then instructed Pramukh Swami Maharaj and Vindu Bhagat again to take Thakurji to the river and bathe him there as well. This was a very sudden and instant wish from Yogiji Maharaj. In fact, they had to change direction. The car had to be immediately redirected just so that Pramukh Swami Maharaj and Mahant Sai Maharaj could give Thakurji a bath as well. We are going to end today's session over here. Shri Swaminarayan Bhagwanani Jai.